At 3 a.m., I got a call saying my dad had a heart attack. I left my entire career in London to be by his side. But when I got to the hospital, they had no record of him. That's when I realized my family faked his death to steal my $8.2 million inheritance. But they didn't know I wasn't the girl they abandoned 5 years ago. This story isn't just about revenge, it's about what happens when you choose truth over blood no matter the cost. Julia Reynolds had always been the kind of woman who found calm in control fabrics, precisely measured patterns, symmetrical time blocked down to the minute. That control, like the hem of her most flattering coat, had carried her from a tiny Connecticut town to a thriving fashion studio nestled in the heart of London. At 29, she had finally begun to feel the weight of her sacrifices paying off. Her spring collection was scheduled to debut in less than a week, her name beginning to circulate quietly but persistently in the elite rooms of fashion circles. She had worked years for this moment, and she had earned every inch of it. So when the phone rang at 3:04 a.m. slicing through the hush of her Notting Hill flat, she first reached for it with irritation. But her annoyance dissolved the moment she saw the name flashing across the screen. Melanie. Her younger sister rarely called. Certainly never at this hour. Julia sat up, heart tightening. She thumbed the screen and pressed it to her ear. Hello, a sharp inhale, then sobs. Julia, it's Dad. Melanie gasped through tears. He had a heart attack. It's bad. The doctors said we should prepare for the worst. Julia's throat tightened. What, when, where is he now? They rushed him to West Haven General. Mom's a wreck. Nathan's with her, but Dad kept asking for you. Before they sedated him. Julia, I think you need to come home. The word home had always felt complicated, like a pair of shoes she'd long outgrown but kept out of guilt. Still, she didn't hesitate. I'm on my way, she said, already climbing out of bed. The next hour passed in a blur of frantic motion. She threw clothes into a suitcase with little thought, cashmere sweaters crumpled next to worn-out jeans, stilettos nestled beside worn sneakers. Her hands trembled as she tried to book a last-minute flight, misspelling her own name twice before locking in a business-class seat on the first available transatlantic flight. By the time the sun broke through the London fog, she was standing in the corner office of Marion Dupree, founder and creative director of Harrington House, the boutique fashion house where Julia had worked for the past 3 years. I'm so sorry, Julia said, her voice shaking more from lack of sleep than fear. There's a family emergency. I have to fly back to the States immediately. Marion, a woman known for her steely composure and surgical cheekbones, looked her over with narrowed eyes. You understand what's at stake, don't you? The Milan buyers will be here Monday. Your line is the closing act. I know, Julia whispered. But it's my father. Marion paused. A long silence stretched between them before she gave a slow, reluctant nod. I hope everything turns out all right. But I can't guarantee your place will be waiting when you return. Julia nodded. She expected that. The fashion world had always been brutally transactional. As she stepped into the cab to Heathrow, her thoughts swirled between past and present. Her father, Thomas Reynolds, had always been a force, booming voice, pressed suits, power lunches. Though they hadn't agreed on much in recent years, he had once been the only person in her family who understood her desire to dream beyond the town lines. He used to take her to bookstores on Sundays, tell her stories of Paris runways, while the rest of the family mocked her for sketching dresses instead of filling out college applications for accounting or real estate. But they'd grown distant. Especially after Grandpa Malcolm's death. After the will. Still, the thought of him lying in a hospital bed, frail and clinging to breath, broke her. On the flight, Julia pressed her forehead to the cool window and let herself remember simpler times. Her dad's laugh echoing across their backyard during summer barbecues. How he'd once held her hand through a thunderstorm when she was 7, whispering that lightning was just nature showing off. She couldn't imagine him gone. During the layover in New York, she tried calling the hospital. The line bounced her from one extension to another. No one could give her any information. She called again. And again. By the time she boarded her connecting flight to Hartford, she was running on caffeine, fear, and a thin thread of hope. As the plane touched down, her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. Be careful when you get here. Things aren't what they seem. Julia stared at the message. For a moment she thought it might have been a mistake, then realized it must have been Margaret Whitmore, their elderly neighbor, a woman who had once baked her birthday cakes when her own mother forgot. Her stomach turned. When she stepped off the plane into the humid Connecticut afternoon, the weight of her past came crashing down all at once. She spotted Nathan waiting at baggage claim, hands in the pockets of his gray blazer, his expression unreadable. "Jules," he said, offering a stiff hug. "Glad you're here." "How's Dad?" she asked, her words tumbling out. Nathan paused a beat too long. "We'll talk in the car." Nathan didn't speak much on the way to the car. He rolled Julia's suitcase behind him in silence, his loafers tapping softly against the tile floor of the terminal. Outside, the Connecticut air was thick and muggy, the kind that made your clothes cling to your back and your past cling to your ribs. "Where's the car?" Julia asked, trying not to sound impatient. "I need to see Dad. Now." "It's in the garage," he said. "Not far." They walked in silence, but Julia could feel tension pooling between them like humidity. Her heels clicked on the concrete, steady, determined. Every second she wasn't at the hospital made her pulse throb with more urgency. "Did you bring anything for him?" she asked. "Like his book, or the fleece blanket he likes." "Is he awake?" Nathan didn't answer. It wasn't until they were pulling out of the parking lot in his black BMW that Julia realized something was wrong. "You didn't tell me what room he's in," she said. Nathan stared at the road. "We'll go home first." "No," she said sharply. "Take me to the hospital." "It's not a good time." "What does that mean?" Nathan's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. "Look, Jules, everyone's at the house. It'll be easier if we talk there." "No," she repeated. "Take me to West Haven General right now." Nathan didn't argue, but he didn't look pleased either. The drive there took less than 15 minutes, and every one of them was lined with memories. Julia had buried deep, passing the corner where she'd scraped her knee on a bike at 6, the old brick bakery her dad used to take her to after dance recitals, the faded Walker Street sign near the school her siblings had attended but she'd long since outgrown. When they pulled into the hospital parking lot, she practically jumped out before the car stopped. Inside, the fluorescent lighting was harsh and impersonal. Julia strode to the reception desk, her voice tight but polite. "Hi. I'm looking for a patient, Thomas Reynolds. He was admitted last night. Cardiac emergency." The nurse at the desk blinked at her, then turned to the computer, typing quickly. "I'm sorry," she said after a moment. "We don't have any record of a Thomas Reynolds being admitted in the past 48 hours. Julia leaned forward. "Can you check again? He would have been brought in by ambulance. My sister called me from here." "I've been on shift since yesterday morning," the nurse said gently. "No one by that name has come through. Room 312 is empty if that's what you were told. It's been under maintenance since Tuesday." Julia's ears began to ring. I need to call my sister," she said, fumbling for her phone, suddenly lightheaded. Nathan stepped beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Let's go, Jules, I can explain." She shook him off. "You lied," she whispered. "You all lied." "It's complicated," he said. "Come home. We'll talk there." Julia looked around, disoriented, betrayed. Her suitcase still sat in the car, her body still buzzing with adrenaline, and yet it was all fake. All of it. The tears, the urgency, the image of her father asking for her from a hospital bed. None of it was real. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do that to me?" Nathan looked away. As they drove back, Julia stared out the window, arms crossed tightly. Her mind flashed through every moment since that call, the plane ticket, the suitcase, the conversation with Marion, the silent prayer she'd said just before takeoff. All of it had been built on a lie. Back in the neighborhood where she'd grown up, the houses looked smaller than she remembered. Or maybe she was finally seeing them for what they were, walls that held too many secrets. When Nathan pulled into the driveway, Julia didn't move right away. Her childhood home loomed in front of her, a 2-story colonial with a wide porch and navy shutters. The porch swing creaked gently in the wind, just as it had when she was 10 and had sat there alone after her first big fight with her mother. Several unfamiliar cars were parked along the curb, including one she recognized as belonging to Bernard Lowell, the family's longtime attorney. Her heart sank further. Inside the house was unusually quiet for the number of people apparently present. It didn't smell like worry or crisis. It smelled like lemon polish and catered finger food. Julia followed the murmurs to the dining room. What she saw stopped her cold. Her mother, impeccably dressed in a cream blouse and pearl earrings, sat sipping tea as if they were hosting a book club. Her sister Melanie, fresh-faced and entirely tear-free, was flipping through a tablet. Across from them, Bernard was shuffling a pile of folders. And there, standing at the window with a glass of bourbon in hand, was her father. Healthy, upright, alive. He turned when he saw her, a practiced smile slipping across his face. "Sweetheart," he said warmly. "You made it." Julia didn't move. The room fell silent. "You lied to me," she said, her voice low and shaking. "All of you." Her mother stood. "Julia, let's not do this here." You made me believe he was dying," Julia interrupted, voice rising. "I gave up everything to come here, my career, my show, my life, because I thought I was saying goodbye to my father." Her father stepped forward, arms open, as if that could erase the betrayal. "You were always the emotional one," he said lightly. "We needed to talk to you face to face, and with your birthday coming up." Julia froze. Her 30th birthday. The inheritance. So that's what this was really about. She took a step back, suddenly nauseous. "You didn't call me home because you missed me," she said, her voice cold now. "You called me back because you want something." Her father's expression didn't falter. "Julia, this is about family. About legacy. Sit down. Let's talk." But Julia had already turned on her heel. She didn't know where she was going yet. But she knew exactly what she was walking away from. Julia didn't sleep that night. She sat at the edge of her childhood bed, still made with the floral duvet from high school, staring at the wallpaper that hadn't changed in a decade. She could still trace the faint outlines of old posters long removed of a younger version of herself who once dreamt of escaping these walls. Back then, she thought distance would be enough. It wasn't. The lies they told to bring her back played on a loop in her head, her sister's fake sobs, her brother's evasive looks, her father's glass of bourbon, raised like it was all one big reunion, not a betrayal. But, above all, it was the calculated performance that chilled her the most. This wasn't a family in crisis, it was a boardroom in disguise. Just after 10 a.m. a knock came at her door. Melanie poked her head in. "Hey, can we talk?" Julia didn't respond, but Melanie came in anyway, holding 2 mugs of coffee. The scent was familiar, almost comforting. "Almost. We didn't mean to scare you," she said softly, handing over a cup. "But it's important. What we need to tell you, it had to be in person." "Is Dad dying?" Julia asked flatly. Melanie hesitated. "Number. Then, everything else you say after that doesn't matter. Please, Jules. Just listen." Reluctantly, Julia followed her downstairs. The dining room had transformed overnight. Gone were the teacups and small talk. Now the table was covered in glossy pamphlets, balance sheets, blueprints, and legal folders. Her father sat at the head like a CEO preparing to pitch an investor. "Julia," he said, gesturing toward the chair beside him, "I'm glad you're here. We have an opportunity, an urgent one, and it directly involves you." "I haven't had coffee yet," Julia said coolly. "So skip the foreplay." Her mother cleared her throat and passed a folder across the table. "This is about your grandfather's trust." Julia opened it, her eyes scanning the dense legal text. Her name appeared multiple times next to long columns of numbers and asset listings. Her throat tightened. "This is the inheritance," she whispered. "All of it." "Yes, Bernard," the family lawyer spoke up, adjusting his glasses. "Malcolm left you a trust valued at $8.2 million, liquid assets, real estate, stocks. It matures on your 30th birthday." Julia blinked. She knew her grandfather had left something, but no one had ever told her the amount. $8.2 million. Her pulse quickened, and not from excitement. "There's a catch, isn't there?" she said. "There's a condition." Bernard nodded. "Your grandfather stipulated that you must not be involved in Walker and Reynolds Enterprises in any capacity, direct or indirect." Julia looked up. "Why?" "Because Malcolm believed you were meant for something different," her father said. He wrote that in the letter he left with the will. He wanted at least one Reynolds to break away from the family business. She laughed bitterly. And yet here you are asking me to do the exact opposite. Her mother leaned forward, palms pressed together. Julia, the company is going through a rough patch. Some developments were delayed, some investors pulled out. It's temporary. But we need capital. Your capital. To bridge the gap. You want me to violate the one boundary Grandpa put in place, Julia said. And funnel my inheritance into a business he never wanted me to be part of. Her father straightened. With your investment, you'd be a partner. On paper, yes. The trust could be transferred into the company and you'd retain a percentage. Let me guess, she interrupted. A minority share. With no voting rights. No control. Just my name and my money tied to your sinking ship. Melanie shifted uncomfortably. It's not sinking. It's just struggling. Julia tossed the folder back on the table. So let me get this straight, you all lied about a heart attack. You manipulated me into coming back, jeopardized my career because you need me to break the only clause in my grandfather's trust. And why? Because you mismanaged your projects and need a bailout. We're family. Julia, her mother, said the words tight like they'd been rehearsed. This is bigger than business. This is about legacy, survival. No, Julia said. This is about desperation. There was silence. Her father leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing slightly. You're overreacting, he said. No, she said again, standing. I'm seeing things clearly for the first time. Her fingers hovered over the folder for a beat. She thought of the late nights in London sewing until her fingers bled. The collection she'd abandoned mid-creation. The look on Marian's face when she left. The younger Julia, who used to believe that if she just worked hard enough they'd finally see her for who she was, not who they wanted her to be. She looked her father in the eye. I'm not signing anything, she said. But you will, he said calmly, too calmly. Because this isn't just about us anymore. Other people are involved. Investors, contractors, employees. If we go under, they suffer too. Then, maybe you should have thought about that before you lied to your own daughter. Julia turned and walked out of the room. The sound of her heels on hardwood echoed like a gavel. They wanted her inheritance. They were willing to lie for it. But they had made one crucial mistake. They thought she was still the same girl who left this house 5 years ago looking for permission. She wasn't. She was a woman now. And they weren't the only ones with a plan. The door to her childhood room closed with a soft thud behind her, but the sound reverberated through Julia's chest like a cannon. She leaned against it, breathing hard, as if she'd just run miles rather than walked up a staircase lined with family portraits that no longer felt like hers. Her hands were trembling again. This time not from jet lag or confusion, but rage. And heartbreak. She stared at the familiar walls, still painted pale blue with the faint pattern of stars she had begged her mother to stencil when she was 12. The old wooden desk in the corner, scarred with years of pencil scratches and highlighter stains, sat exactly where she'd left it. For a moment it felt like she'd stepped into a museum exhibit of a girl who no longer existed. She walked over, running her fingers along the edge of the desk. It creaked when she pulled the middle drawer open. Old notebooks. Dried-out pens. A broken bracelet. And tucked beneath a stack of index cards and forgotten theater ticket stubs, something yellowed with age. A letter folded once, sealed in a plain white envelope. Her name written across the front in handwriting so familiar, so distinct it made her breath catch. Julia. Only that. In thick black ink. All capital letters, no flourish. Her grandfather's handwriting. She sank slowly onto the edge of the bed, holding the envelope in her hands for a long time before opening it. Part of her didn't want to read it, like the moment she did he would be gone for real. But the rest of her, the version that had been bruised and trampled by the people downstairs, needed this. Her fingers gently unfolded the page. My dearest Julia, by the time you read this, I will likely be long gone. And if your parents have done what I expect they might, then you're reading it because you need a reminder of who you are, not who they say you are. I want to tell you something that no one else may have ever said to you plainly. You are not an extension of this family. You are a whole person. A person with vision, courage, and your own truth. You do not owe us your loyalty if it costs you your peace. I know your mother has always tried to mold you into her definition of success, and your father, well, he has his own demons. But I've watched you since you were small, building cities out of shoeboxes, designing dresses for dolls when other girls were still playing Tea Party. I saw the way you looked at the world, Julia. With hunger. With color. You were never meant to be small. That's why I left you what I did, not to burden you but to give you the freedom I believe you earned. I placed boundaries in the trust because I knew this family might try to bend your future back into their shape. Don't let them. Family can be a beautiful thing, but only when it remembers you are a person, not a possession. Choose your own path, Julia. Even if it's hard, even if it costs you everything. Because one day when the noise fades, you'll hear the most important voice again, your own, and she deserves to be heard. With all the love I have, Grandpa. By the time she finished reading, her vision was blurred by tears. She clutched the letter to her chest like a lifeline, as if his words could reach across death and remind her that she wasn't crazy, wasn't cruel, wasn't wrong to feel what she felt. She had always felt different, not because she was difficult, but because she was awake in a family that had long since gone to sleep. She thought of all the times she had been told she was selfish for wanting something else. For dreaming beyond real estate or family dinners. For leaving. They made her believe she was abandoning them. But reading her grandfather's words, she realized they had abandoned her first. Long before she ever boarded a plane to London. Her shoulders began to shake as sobs escaped her throat, deep and guttural, the kind that come from years of swallowed pain finally rising to the surface. She wasn't crying because they had lied. She was crying because somewhere deep down she had still hoped they wouldn't. She cried for the girl who had waited for them to see her. She cried for the woman who came back thinking maybe this time would be different. And she cried for the man who had been the only one who saw her clearly and was now gone. When the tears finally slowed, she sat in silence, the letter still clutched in her hands. The bedroom was dim now, dusk spilling in through the curtains. She could hear faint clinks of silverware downstairs, dinner being served like nothing had happened, but everything had changed, and now so had she. Julia walked to her desk, and gently placed the letter into the back of her journal, the one she always traveled with but hadn't written in for months. It belonged there now, like a compass tucked in her pocket. She walked to the window, watching the sky darken into that smoky lavender shade unique to East Coast evenings. The town stretched quietly beneath her, familiar and foreign all at once. Somewhere out there were people her family had hurt in their ambition, in their secrecy, in their hunger. And now they wanted to use her as a tool to keep the illusion alive. But she wasn't a tool. She was her grandfather's granddaughter. And she had decisions to make. The next morning, Julia descended the staircase with a softness she hadn't worn in years. Her posture, her smile, even the gentle tone in her voice, all deliberate. From the outside, she was the daughter who had come home humbled by crisis and ready to help. But inside, a different woman was moving into position. "Morning," she said lightly, slipping into the kitchen where her mother was pouring coffee into matching porcelain mugs. "Morning, sweetheart." Her mother looked up, visibly surprised by Julia's cheerful tone. "I've been thinking," Julia said, taking a seat at the island. "About everything. Maybe I overreacted yesterday." Her mother tilted her head, gauging. Jet lag does strange things to the mind. Julia nodded and offered a small smile. "I just want to understand better. Maybe if you showed me the documents again." Her mother brightened, instantly, relief washing over her features like sunshine after a storm. "Of course. I'll have Bernard drop everything off this afternoon." Julia sipped her coffee and nodded, hiding the small audio recorder in her sweater pocket. Let the games begin. That afternoon, Julia found herself back in her childhood bedroom with stacks of company records, legal drafts, and investor reports spread across the bed. She photographed everything with her phone, uploading each image into a hidden folder on her cloud drive, password protected, and labeled innocuously, Spring Mood Board. To anyone else, it would look like design inspiration. But Julia wasn't collecting silhouettes or color palettes. She was gathering evidence. Because something wasn't right. She had felt it the moment she stepped into that dining room. It wasn't just about bad investments, it was something deeper, dirtier. Her instincts sharpened when she visited the walk-in safe downstairs, just for reassurance, as her father had put it. Inside, alongside dusty real estate deeds and family jewelry, were lists of shell companies and transfers to offshore accounts with vague labels like consulting fee, Belize, and private equity escrow, Bahamas. The amounts were staggering and suspicious. Later that evening, Julia walked the quiet sidewalks of their cul-de-sac needing air. She found herself almost unconsciously at the doorstep of the woman who had once been her second mother, Mrs. Whitmore. Margaret Whitmore was 78 now, her silver hair clipped back with tortoiseshell pins, but her sharp blue eyes hadn't dulled an ounce. When Julia knocked, the door opened almost immediately. "I was wondering how long it would take you to come by," Margaret said, as if they'd spoken just yesterday. "I found your text," Julia replied softly. "Come in." The old house smelled like cedarwood and lemon balm tea. Margaret led her into the cozy den and gestured toward the couch. "I assume you've figured it out by now," she said, settling across from her. "Not everything," Julia admitted. "But something's wrong. Very wrong." Margaret nodded gravely. "They're not just in debt, Julia. Your father and Nathan. They've been operating what amounts to a Ponzi scheme." Julia felt her stomach tighten. Margaret continued, voice steady. "Walker and Reynolds has been using new investor money to pay off old investor returns, all while skimming millions into side accounts. Offshore. Untraceable to anyone not looking closely." Julia exhaled slowly. "And now they want my inheritance to keep the illusion going." "Exactly. They've run out of new investors, and the current ones are starting to demand answers." Julia leaned forward. "Why are you telling me this? It could put you at risk." Margaret's gaze didn't waver. "Because your grandfather asked me to. Before he died, Malcolm told me he feared this would happen. That he was putting protections in place for you. And that if anything felt wrong, I was to tell you the truth no matter what it cost." For a moment, Julia was silent. Her chest ached again, this time not from betrayal but gratitude. Even in death, her grandfather was still shielding her. "Do you have proof?" she asked. Margaret stood and returned a moment later with a file. Inside were copies of wire transfers, anonymous whistleblower reports, and a newspaper clipping Julia hadn't seen. Construction delays, plague Walker and Reynolds' luxury project, lawsuits pending. "This is just the beginning," Margaret said. Julia's fingers tightened around the folder. The next day, she made another calculated move. She reached out to Liam Cooper, her high school ex-boyfriend turned financial crimes investigator for the state. They hadn't spoken in years, not since she'd left for London and he'd stayed to become the sensible one, as her mother had once called him. But she still had his number, and when she texted him, "Need to talk. Privately. It's about something serious." He replied within minutes. They met at a quiet cafe in the next town over. Liam had grown into himself, trading the boyish charm she remembered for something more grounded. When he saw her, his face softened. "Julia," he said. "Didn't expect this." She slid into the booth and glanced around. "I can't say much yet. But I need your help off the record for now. My family is involved in something big and illegal." He didn't blink. "Tell me everything." And so she did, carefully, piece by piece. He listened without interruption, his pen scratching quietly on a pad, asking the occasional sharp question. When she finally stopped, he looked at her, expression grave. "If even half of what you're describing is true," he said, "this isn't just civil fraud. This is federal crime territory. Wire fraud. Securities fraud. Possibly money laundering." Julia nodded. "I need time to collect everything. I want this airtight." He studied her for a long moment. "And what do you want me to do?" "Help me make sure they can't touch my inheritance. And that the people they've hurt get justice." Liam sat back. "You always were the brave one." Julia smiled faintly. "I'm just the one who finally stopped being afraid." The dining room gleamed like it had been prepped for a wedding. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier. Silverware had been meticulously aligned beside bone-white plates bearing the Reynolds family crest. Fresh peonies adorned the center of the long table, of flower Julia's mother hadn't used since her childhood birthdays. The smell of pot roast drifted through the air. Her favorite. It was all a production. And Julia. She played her role to perfection. She wore a soft blue dress, modest, elegant. Her makeup was light, her smile gentle, her voice carefully pitched between gratitude and submission. She offered compliments. She laughed at old stories. She toasted to family. The wolves thought the lamb had returned home. "Thank you for the meal, Mom," Julia said sweetly, raising her glass. "It reminded me of when things were simpler." "Of course, darling," her mother beamed. "It's good to have everyone together again." Around the table sat the entire cast, her father puffed with pride, Nathan looking slightly less smug than usual. Melanie trying to seem relaxed but gripping her wine glass too tight. Even distant cousins and great-uncles were here, flown in under the guise of celebrating family unity. But Julia knew better. This was the final push, the ceremonial signing of her inheritance. The trap. Bernard, the family's lawyer, cleared his throat and rose. "Before dessert, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge Julia's generosity and foresight." He gestured toward a leather folder resting beside her plate. "The documents have been prepared. Once signed, the transfer will be scheduled for the morning of your birthday. Your trust assets will flow directly into Walker and Reynolds Development, where you will be recognized as a formal partner." He smiled like a man offering a golden crown, not a poisoned chalice. Julia met his gaze calmly. "I appreciate all the work you've done, Bernard." She reached for the folder, fingers touched leather, but didn't open it. "Before I sign," she said, rising from her chair, "I want to say something." The room quieted. Forks clinked against plates. Her father leaned forward slightly, sensing triumph. "I want to thank you all for showing me who you really are." There was a pause. Her mother's smile faltered. "I came back here expecting love, hoping for redemption, maybe even reconciliation. What I found instead was manipulation, greed, and betrayal." "Julia," her mother began. But Julia raised a hand. "Save it. You lied about Dad dying. You staged a medical emergency to drag me away from my career, from my life. And why? Because I was the final bank account you hadn't drained." Nathan stood, face reddening. "That's not fair." "Sit down, Nathan," Julia said, her voice like ice. Then turning to her father. "You told me this was about legacy, that family comes first, but what you meant was my money comes first. And if I refused, I stopped being family." Her father rose now too, eyes narrow. "What the hell are you doing?" Julia took a deep breath, her voice clear, deliberate. "Protecting the one part of this family that still has integrity." Then she walked calmly toward the front door and opened it. In stepped James Sullivan, her grandfather's former attorney, flanked by 2 federal agents and 2 representatives from the SEC. Behind them, Liam Cooper in a navy suit holding a leather binder. Gasps rippled through the room like a shockwave. "What is this?" Bernard blurted, stumbling back. "Good evening," said one of the agents, displaying her badge. "Special Agent Heather Daniels, FBI. We have a warrant to search the premises for evidence of financial fraud, securities violations, and conspiracy to defraud investors." Her father lunged forward. "You can't be serious," Julia stepped between them. "I'm very serious." The second agent held up a folder. "Charles Reynolds, Nathan Reynolds, you are both under federal investigation. We'll need you to come with us for questioning." "No," her father hissed. "You don't understand, this is our home, this is private." "Not anymore," Julia said quietly. "Not when it was funded by lies." Nathan charged toward her, rage distorting his face. "You traitor, you've ruined everything." But Liam intercepted him, calm but firm. "Back off. You touch her and this becomes assault." Julia's mother collapsed into a chair, hand over her mouth. "You've destroyed the Reynolds name," her father snarled. "We built everything for this family and you threw it away out of spite." Julia stared at him, unflinching. "No," she said. "You destroyed it the moment you put your pride above our people. When you stopped seeing me as your daughter and started seeing me as a solution. I'm not your lifeline, I'm not your fallback. I'm not for sale." The room was chaos now. Agents moved through the house gathering files. Bernard was arguing with one of the SEC reps, but it was useless. The evidence Julia had collected, photos, audio, bank statements, was damning. Her father looked at her one last time, his face contorted in something between hatred and disbelief. "You were always the disappointment," he spat. "Weak, unruly, ungrateful." Julia tilted her head. "No," she said. "I was just the only one who knew that love isn't something you earn by signing your soul away." And then as the agents led them out one by one, her father still cursing, Nathan trembling, Bernard defeated, Julia turned to the remaining family members still frozen around the table. "If any of you still think this was about money," she said, "you're wrong." She placed her hand on the back of the chair her grandfather had once occupied at every family dinner. "This was about what it means to be family. And you forgot." Silence followed her as she walked out of the room, down the hallway and out into the night. The air was cool, freeing. The legacy she had inherited had nearly devoured her. But she had chosen differently. Not revenge, justice. And, finally, peace. 3 weeks after the night that shattered her family, Julia stood in a quiet courthouse hallway watching the fluorescent lights buzz faintly overhead. Her father was being sentenced that day. He refused to look at her as he was led into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, wrists chained in front of him like a man already halfway gone. His once imposing presence had shriveled under the weight of consequence. Beside him, Nathan walked with stiff shoulders, jaw clenched as though dignity could still protect him. Her mother didn't attend. Neither did Melanie. Julia sat alone in the second row, back straight, heart steady. When the judge pronounced 15 years for her father, 9 years for Nathan, and 5 years probation for Bernard, after full license revocation, Julia exhaled deeply. Justice had spoken, but it hadn't healed anything. Not yet. The next day, she stood at the edge of a town hall auditorium in a neighboring county, watching small families and elderly couples file into rows of folding chairs. Some looked curious, others looked angry, and a few looked broken. These were the victims, the ones no one in her family had ever thought twice about. Julia stepped up to the podium, microphone feedback buzzing for a split second before it cleared. "My name is Julia Reynolds," she began, voice calm but firm. "And I'm here because my last name harmed you." The silence in the room thickened. "I didn't know what my family was doing. But once I did, I stopped it. And now I want to help fix what they broke." She swallowed. "I can't give you back your time. Or your peace of mind. But starting today, the Phoenix Grant is open. It's a restitution fund built from my inheritance, your money returned as much as I can make it." Someone in the back let out a breath that sounded almost like a sob. Another stood. An older man in a navy windbreaker, voice trembling. "We put our savings in your father's project. For our grandson's college." Julia met his gaze. "You'll be the first to receive a disbursement," she said gently. Over the next several weeks, she met them all. A single mother who had lost her mortgage after investing in what she thought was a secure housing development. A retired couple who had sold their second car to pay their bills when dividends stopped arriving. A young man whose late father's pension had been absorbed into a project that never existed beyond the blueprints. Each story etched a new scar onto her soul. But with every apology, every handwritten check, every time someone's eyes filled with gratitude instead of despair, something inside her healed too. She had inherited money, but also a legacy of destruction. Now she was rewriting it. Melanie came to visit only once, weeks after taking a plea deal in exchange for full cooperation and revealing the offshore accounts no one else had known about. She looked different. Thin, worn, softer. They met in a small cafe near the courthouse. Melanie's hands wrapped tightly around a chipped ceramic mug. "You could have let me go down with them," she said quietly. "You could have told me the truth from the beginning," Julia replied. A pause. Then Melanie nodded. "I was scared," she admitted. "Scared of what they'd do. Scared of losing the only place I knew how to belong." Julia stirred her tea. "Belonging isn't the same as loyalty." Melanie looked out the window, eyes misty. "I think I always hated you for leaving. But now I see you didn't leave us. You escaped." "I'm trying to help clean up the mess," Julia said. "For everyone." Melanie gave a small, sad smile. "Then, maybe you really are the best of us." Julia didn't answer. She didn't need to. The Phoenix Grant office opened a month later in the same building that once housed Walker and Reynolds' headquarters. Julia refused to rename it after herself. Instead, the foundation's motto, "Rise from the Ruins," was etched into the glass doors. The walls were lined with community artwork. The board included former clients, community advocates, and ethics specialists. Julia worked without a title. Without need for applause, she showed up every day to answer letters, to review restitution cases, to talk to city council about ethical redevelopment, and quietly to begin teaching workshops on financial awareness, especially for women in vulnerable economic positions. Her phone would buzz occasionally with press requests. They called her the heiress who turned on her bloodline. She ignored them, because this was never about vengeance. It was about redemption. One evening, as she was closing the office, a woman in her late 60s walked in. She had deep smile lines, calloused hands, and a pink tote with worn corners. She hesitated. "I'm not here for money," she said. "I just wanted to meet the girl who stood up when everyone else sat down." Julia blinked. "I had 3 sons," the woman continued. "One of them worked for your father. He quit when he found out about the fake permits. Couldn't sleep at night," he said. "They blackballed him in this town. Lost everything." She pulled something from her tote, a photo. Her son smiling in a construction vest. "He took his own life last year. Depression. Shame." Said no one would believe him. Julia swallowed, her throat raw. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. The woman nodded. "He wasn't perfect, but he was brave." She pressed the photo into Julia's hand. "Thank you for proving he wasn't crazy." Then she turned and left. Julia sat in the quiet of the lobby for a long time after clutching the photo. There were some things she would never be able to fix. Some pain too old to reverse. But she could still choose what came next. The prison visiting room was cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Gray walls. Plastic chairs. Murmured conversations filled the air like static. Everything about it felt temporary, suspended in a kind of hollow time. Julia stood near the entrance, palms damp, unsure if she was ready. Her mother had written just once. A short letter. No excuses. Just one line near the end that had shaken her more than expected. "If you come, I promise I won't ask for forgiveness. Only understanding." And that was why Julia had come. To understand. To face the woman who'd taught her grace, poise, and conditional love. A door buzzed. From the other side, Helen Reynolds stepped in. She wore a pale blue prison uniform, her silver hair pulled back into a simple bun. She still walked with her back straight, her chin lifted, but her eyes had changed. They were softer now. More human. "Julia," she said, voice trembling just slightly. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure either," Julia replied, pulling out the metal chair across from her. They sat in silence for several seconds, the weight of decades between them. Not just the recent betrayals, but the whispered criticisms, the withheld affection, the relentless expectations that had shaped Julia's entire girlhood. "You look well," Helen said, finally. Julia tilted her head. "Considering." A faint smile ghosted across Helen's lips. "I deserve that. I'm not here to punish you, Mom." "Then why are you here?" Julia hesitated. "Then. Because I need to know who you were before you became this version of you. The woman who could justify lying to her own daughter's face. The woman who stood by while her husband faked a heart attack." Helen blinked. Her shoulders slumped for the first time. "I was someone else once," she said quietly. "I studied art history. Got into Parsons. I wanted to be a museum curator. Maybe even paint again." Julia stared. "I never knew that." "You weren't supposed to," Helen said, eyes distant. "Your grandfather told me dreams were for people who didn't have legacies to uphold. And your father, he made it clear early on that love came with expectations. Control was survival in that house." Julia let that sink in. "Is that why you tried to control me too?" she asked. Helen looked away. "I saw you taking risks I never dared to take. Living a life outside our bubble. And instead of being proud, I was terrified. That you'd fall, that people would judge. That I'd lose you to a world I didn't understand. So I tried to pull you back in." The only way I knew how. Julia's throat tightened. You didn't just try to pull me in, you tried to erase who I was. You made me feel like being different was a betrayal. Helen reached out but stopped short of touching her. I know, she whispered. And it's the deepest shame I carry. Another silence fell. And then Julia said softly but firmly, I don't need you to apologize, Mom. I need you to understand that I bled too. That when I left this house, I wasn't trying to rebel, I was trying to breathe. Tears welled in Helen's eyes. You were always the brave one. No, Julia said, shaking her head. I was the one who broke. Helen looked at her daughter, really looked. Not as a product, not as a pawn, but as a person. You remind me, she said slowly, of the girl I used to be before I traded freedom for acceptance. You became what I didn't have the courage to fight for. Julia exhaled, her jaw tight. For years I wanted you to be proud of me. I designed dresses hoping one day you'd wear one. I imagined calling you with good news and hearing joy, not judgment. Helen covered her mouth, trying not to cry too loudly. I did see your collections, she whispered. Online. Even in prison I saw them. They were beautiful, Julia. You are extraordinary. Julia's heart cracked in a way that felt both painful and strangely liberating. Maybe this wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. I'm building something now, she said. A foundation. A new kind of legacy. Helen wiped her eyes. And the family name, I don't care about the name anymore, Julia said. But I care about the people who got hurt, about doing right by them. Helen nodded slowly. Then, maybe that's what it means to truly carry a legacy. Not the wealth, not the prestige, but the weight and the choice to lift it differently. A guard tapped his watch. Time was running out. Julia stood. So did Helen. They looked at each other for a long moment, two women bound by blood, severed by betrayal and stitched back together, perhaps by honesty. I don't know if I'll come again, Julia said. Helen nodded. I wouldn't ask you to. But just as Julia turned to go, her mother called out softly, Thank you for coming. Even if it took prison to finally talk to you as my daughter, not my reflection. Julia paused. Then offered one last glance over her shoulder. Next time, she said, talk to me as a woman. And with that, she walked out into the sun. The London morning was crisp, painted in soft grey light and the muted hum of city sounds. Julia stood before the glass storefront of Ardent and Altru, the name etched elegantly in gold across the top. Her new beginning. The fashion house was nothing like Harrington or the glossy firms she'd once aspired to. It was smaller, slower, built on different values. The designs were crafted from sustainably sourced fabrics made in partnership with artisan cooperatives from marginalized communities. Every garment had a story, not just of style, but of survival, of dignity, of intentionality. Ethical fashion. Two words that once sounded naive in boardrooms now guided every decision she made. And people responded. The debut collection sold out in weeks. But Julia didn't chase headlines anymore. She chased peace. That afternoon, as she stitched a hem on a linen wrap dress, her phone buzzed. Liam. The name alone softened her, touching down at Heathrow. Do I still get that rain-soaked walking tour you promised? She smiled. Typed back, only if you bring proper boots. And no ties. They had kept in touch, one slow, intentional conversation at a time. No labels. No pressure. Just two people who had seen each other at their worst and chosen to stay. Liam, ever patient, never tried to define them. And Julia, once allergic to permanence, had begun to enjoy the quiet comfort of possibility. Later that week, Julia opened a letter written in looping, nervous handwriting. From Elise. Her sister hadn't spoken much since the trial. They had exchanged brief messages, updates on legal status, muted apologies. But this was different. I'm working with a women's reentry program now. Teaching, writing to inmates. It's strange. The same charm I used to manipulate investors now helps women find their voices. I thought of you when a student wrote, I am not what I've done, I'm what I choose next. Julia read the sentence twice. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know I'm trying. For real this time. And I hope you're finding peace. You always deserved it. No signature, just your sister. Julia folded the letter carefully and slid it into the drawer beside her desk. The one she kept for things that mattered. 1 month later, she flew home. Not for court dates or confrontation, but for closure. The building once known as Reynolds Development HQ was nearly unrecognizable. Where there had been tinted glass and cold marble now stood a community wellness and resource center funded by the Phoenix Grant and local partnerships. A modest bronze plaque sat near the entrance. In memory of Malcolm Reynolds, a legacy reimagined. Inside, the space buzzed with life. Children's voices echoed from a reading corner. A job training seminar was in session. An immigrant mother asked questions about housing assistance in halting English. Julia stood in the back unnoticed, heartful. She didn't need them to recognize her. She just needed this place to exist. In the quiet of that afternoon, she stepped into a repurposed office, now a creative writing classroom. Drawings and poems lined the walls. In the corner, a bookshelf held copies of letters from the inside a zine compiled by formerly incarcerated women. Julia flipped one open. A paragraph underlined in blue ink read, "Forgiveness isn't a door we walk through. It's a room we slowly build brick by brick with the hands of our pain." She didn't know who had written it, but it felt like her. Like them. That night, Julia sat alone beneath a starlit sky on the porch of the small cottage she rented outside town. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, a mug of tea warming her palms. So much had changed. And yet, so much still ached. There were nights when her father's words haunted her. When she remembered the look in her mother's eyes right before the prison guards led her away. When the ache of not being understood rose again, quiet but present. But now those moments didn't define her. They reminded her of the path she'd chosen, the cycle she had broken, the strength it took to walk away and to stay. As the first chill of fall touched the air, her phone buzzed again. This time a photo from Margaret, now chair of the Phoenix Grant Board. The community garden had just opened. Kids were planting kale. A mural of butterflies spread across the side wall, painted by local teens. "Transformation is slow, my dear," Margaret had written once, "but it always begins in silence." Julia smiled, watching the wind stir the leaves around her. She didn't know what came next. More collections, maybe. More letters. Maybe one day her own family. Or maybe not. But whatever came, she knew now how to hold it. With both hands, with an open heart, not as an heir to ruin, but as a woman who had rebuilt herself quietly, deliberately, fully. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn. Julia stood by the wide-paneled window of her London flat, wrapped in a soft cardigan, her bare feet sunk into the wool rug beneath her. The city stretched beyond the glass-muted rooftops, blinking red lights, the quiet heartbeat of morning. In the reflection, she saw herself. Not the version from a year ago, the girl dragged back into chaos by a phone call at 3 a.m., but the woman she had become. Still soft in places, still bruised in memory, but whole. Real. Behind her on the ceiling of the small guest room she'd turned into an art nook glowed a constellation of tiny stars, the same kind her grandfather once helped her stick onto her childhood ceiling back in Connecticut. They weren't the same ones, of course. Those had peeled away long ago, like most of the illusions she'd grown up with. But these new ones she had bought herself. Quietly, deliberately. Placing each one as she remembered. A small rebellion, a quiet reclaiming. She thought of Grandpa Malcolm often. Not the money he left her, though it had changed everything. But the letter. The part that had whispered more than any inheritance ever could, "Family is a beautiful thing, unless they forget you are not an asset. You are a person." How many people had forgotten that simple truth? Her father, who had traded integrity for control. Her mother, who wrapped love in expectation. Even Julia herself, when she once thought being good enough meant being pleasing. But not anymore. Now she understood that legacy wasn't in bloodlines. It lived in the quiet choices no one else saw. The ones you made when no one was clapping. The ones that left you lonelier but freer. Her phone buzzed gently on the windowsill. A text from Liam. "Plane delayed. But I found a bookstore at the gate. Got you another poetry collection. Your shelf will hate me." She smiled. Tapped back shelves are meant to be overfilled with good stories. She paused, then added, "So are hearts." Later that afternoon, she visited the Phoenix Arts Workshop, a new arm of the foundation built inside a renovated textile mill. She watched as a group of women, some newly released from prison, learned pattern making for the first time. Their laughter echoed through the industrial beams, raw and vibrant. A woman named Sarai held up a jacket she had just finished, a clumsy hem, crooked buttons, but her eyes shone. "This," she said, "is the first thing I've ever made that no one told me to throw away." Julia clapped with the others, but inside she blinked back tears. Not out of pity, but out of recognition. Because that's what healing felt like. Creating something you weren't ashamed to keep. As she left the center, she took a detour. To the edge of the city. To a quiet green space where her grandfather's ashes had been scattered beneath an old oak. She knelt in the grass, her fingers grazing the soil. "I thought I had to become someone you'd be proud of," she whispered. "But you already were, not because I followed the path, but because I left it." She reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a swatch of fabric hand-stitched by Sarai, and buried it gently beneath the oak. "Another kind of legacy," she said. That night, back in her flat, Julia sat at her writing desk. She opened a new journal, clean pages, stiff spine. At the top of the first page she wrote, "I didn't choose my family, but I chose the truth. And the truth is the most beautiful part of the inheritance I kept." She closed the journal. Exhaled. Not everything had been mended. Some things never would be. Her father hadn't written from prison. Her mother's letters had become sparse. Melanie was still figuring herself out. But the cycle had broken. Because Julia had said no. Had said enough. Had said me. And now she was living the kind of story her grandfather would have quietly tucked into his pocket. Not loud, not perfect. But true. As she curled into bed, the stars on her ceiling glowed faintly above her. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't dream of running. She dreamt of building, of new names, new families, new beginnings. And somewhere in that vast space between pain and peace, Julia Reynolds, the woman who had once been seen only as an investment, became someone no one could ever price again.